Delighted to be joined in the studio by Peter Tatchell, human rights and LGBT campaigner. Peter, you will have heard that speech. Some bits of it you might agree with, and some bits of it you might have some very strong views on.
Well, Suella Braverman has been disingenuous because no one can get asylum in this country simply because they're gay or even simply because they've experienced discrimination. It has to be a much higher threshold of persecution, and they have to produce evidence. They can't just claim it, they have to produce evidence. So no one gets asylum simply on their say-so.
And do you think the Home Office is actually, in a sense, acting in that way, as you've just described, or actually are some just using the discrimination terminology and essentially looking to be granted asylum on that basis? So do you think maybe the Home Office, her own department, is at fault here, Peter?
Well, my experience is that the Home Office barristers are very, very tough. The caseworkers are very, very tough. They demand very rigorous, high standards of evidence and proof. And I can tell you, I've dealt with many LGBT plus refugees and women and political refugees. They've produced their evidence and been knocked back because it hasn't been good enough. And they had to go and find more evidence, proper, official evidence, to show their claim of persecution. So the Home Office is not being weak or soft at all. There are too many hurdles, and a lot of people get refused. Even though they are genuine, because they simply haven't got the evidence.
And of course, what we do know is that the whole process, whether suitable applicant or not, just takes way, way too long. Instead of taking weeks, which it used to do 15, 20 years ago, it's now taking years and years to the sufferance of everybody and the cost to the British taxpayer.
And the recent suicide of a young lesbian woman from Oman who'd been left waiting by the Home Office for over a year, effectively locked up in a hotel. She got so depressed, so hopeless, she took her own life just last week. And that's the kind of plight that many refugees face, and we don't hear enough about. So you're right, speedier, faster processing.
But the principle of her speech, that actually this is a 70-year-old convention that was basically, it was drawn up by Europeans.
Including Britain.
And in a sense, it's good to lead the way, but it was for a completely different time. It was for post-war Europe. It wasn't envisaged for the situation we now currently find ourselves in. So do you think she's right to actually highlight it and say it needs amending?
I don't think the principle needs amending. You know, fear or experience of well-founded, evidence-based persecution should be the litmus test. It is the litmus test and should remain so. But I do think that absolutely, we do have to insist that everyone seeking asylum has to produce evidence.
Proper evidence.
Proper evidence, and it has to be rigorously examined by the Home Office, and only when proven to be true and accurate, only then do people get asylum. And that's basically the system as it operates now.
Well, yes, but the reality is, 10 or 12 years ago, we were, I think, were recognising and accepting about 25% of asylum applications. That figure now is in the mid-70s, creeping up nearly, I think, to 80%. So there's been a trebling of the number. I think we can all accept that there hasn't actually been a trebling of the quality of applicants fearing and fleeing genuine war zones and persecution. I think most people accept that there's a huge increase in economic migrants who are then being accepted.
Well, none of the refugees that I'm dealing with are economic migrants. They have produced really strong evidence of persecution, prison records of being jailed, medical records of being tortured. So I think the economic migrant issue is a separate one. But even on that issue, how would the National Health Service survive if we didn't have economic migrants? There are so many doctors and nurses.
Peter, that's called lawful immigration, and we've welcomed healthcare workers from all over the world, and I support that. But I'd like to train our own. And the other thing is, obviously, regrettably, within those coming across the channel, we know that there are those who are looking to operate in gangs, join the drug gangs, the money laundering gangs, tragically prostitution, all of this stuff.
I've got no brief for any of that. But I think we have to make a clear distinction. There are people who do suffer genuine persecution and they need sanctuary. But I think really, at the end of the day, we need to get to the root cause. Why are these people fleeing? It's war, poverty, persecution. Let's address, as a global community, let's address those issues, because if we can resolve those conflicts, that persecution, that poverty, we will have less refugees. It'll be cost effective in the long term.
In the long term, yes, but the reality is we're dealing with the short term and the huge increase in numbers just in the next 12 to 36 months. And I think that's what people are most worried about. And that's why I fear that if we don't deal with this rapidly, then the consequences for Europe and the United Kingdom become really serious. And exactly the opposite of what our people want.
I would like to see an emergency international conference of all the nations of the world to get together to collectively fund solutions to the reasons why people flee, why they're refugees, because most people do not want to leave their homes and families. Most people want to stay in their home countries. And if we can facilitate that, there will be less refugees.
I like the word emergency. That implies urgency, Peter. And
Absolutely.
I've said we need to show that leadership. We need to say 6 months or we're out. That's what I call leadership. You probably wouldn't agree with that, but Peter, thank you so much for coming in. Really appreciate your thoughts.